Hello and welcome to Happy Horror Time. My name is Tim Murdoch.
And my name is Matt Emmert. Today's special guest is the director and co-writer of Imaginary, the new supernatural horror film that might just have you taking a second look at that cute little teddy bear of yours. But he's no stranger to the genre, having directed the teen horror flicks Cry Wolf and Truth or Dare, 2020's Fantasy Island, and a 2022 Netflix film I absolutely love because it's so Halloween-focused, The Curse of Bridge Hollow. Please welcome to the podcast, Jeff Wadlow.
Woohoo, welcome me. I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm just so excited to be here.
Well, we're excited to have you on. And first off, congrats on the release of Imaginary. We saw it. We really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for, just putting this out there. And before we dive into that film, we'd love to chat with you a little bit just about your early life and career in horror, if that's okay.
Of course, let's do it.
Okay, so we read that you were born in Virginia and that your mom was a state senator and your aunt is famed journalist Katie Couric. So what was it like growing up around those professions, and how did you end up becoming interested in filmmaking?
It was incredible. I was raised by strong women, not just my mother and my aunt, but all my aunts, my grandmothers, my stepmother. It's one of the reasons why I like writing strong female characters, why my female characters are almost never victims. They always have agency and they're always badasses. And I think, when I tell people on a film set that I'm the son of a politician, they go, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see it. I can see it. So it was a great way to grow up.
That's awesome. And then how did you end up getting involved in filmmaking? Were you always interested in making films when you were growing up?
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town in Virginia called Charlottesville, and there really was no film industry anywhere nearby, but I loved movies. I was a little film nerd. And this story I've been told by my father, I don't really remember it this way, but he says we walked out of Empire Strikes Back when I was 5 years old. And I said to him, what does the director do? And he said, he talks to the actors, he decides where the camera goes. He's kind of in charge of telling the story. And I said, that's what I'm going to do, Dad. And I pretty much knew that that's what I was going to do, but there was no digital video, no YouTube. So I had a little VHS camcorder deal that I got for a birthday. But I would shoot movies and I would edit them in camera. So it'd be I'd say, you say your line, I hit stop. Now I'll go over to the other actor, you say your line, I hit stop. I made a lot of movies that I was both characters in because I just didn't have access to other actors. But I also did a lot of theater because that was kind of all you could do as a kid growing up in the 80s and early 90s. And then I really had my mind blown one year. I think I was 13 or 14. My mom took me out of school to go to a shot-by-shot workshop over 2 days taught by Roger Ebert on Citizen Kane. We sat in the movie theater and he took us through it shot by shot, 6 hours a day, and kind of taught this master class on directing. And it sort of just changed the way I looked at movies. I suddenly realized, you can study this. This can be an academic pursuit. And I majored in film at Dartmouth, and I got my master's degree at USC, and I got right in the game.
Wait, how old were you when you attended that Roger Ebert seminar?
I was in 7th grade, so probably 13.
Wow. I mean, to have the discipline and patience to go through that at that age is pretty commendable, because in 7th grade, I don't think I was doing anything but playing Nintendo.
I had a video camera, but it was the most basic, bare bones video camera. It was literally like you said, stop. It was terrible. But
so you were meant to be a director. I mean, this is from the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, I knew from very early on that that's what I was going to do. And I dabbled in acting because obviously theater was really the only outlet for communing with an audience at that point in technology's development, evolution. And obviously I write and produce. My master's degree is actually from the Peter Stark producing program at USC. But it's all been building towards a career in directing.
And were horror films on your radar? Did you have a favorite Friday the 13th? That's what I might go to always. But were they on your radar? Did they have an impact on you?
Well, I love all genres of film. I view genre sort of like cuisine, right? Who wants to just eat in a French restaurant every night for the rest of their lives? You want to go to a Japanese restaurant, you want to get some Indian food. So I like different genres, and I've always loved the horror genre. I think I gravitate more towards subgenres of horror, like horror comedy, horror action, horror adventure, as opposed to like just like straight up in your face horror movies. I mean, my favorite horror movies are Jaws, which is horror adventure, Aliens, which I would call action horror, Seven, which I think is really like a horror thriller, horror mystery, Poltergeist, which is like fantasy horror almost, right? So I like all the subgenres because I just like genre so much.
No, that makes sense, and I mean we have tons of favorites. We're big slasher horror people, but but you know, tons of. I mean, I think Jaws is one of your favorites.
Oh my gosh,
right?
I love Jaws 1, 2, 3, and The Revenge.
Yes, every one of them.
I've seen them all.
So you know, moving forward, we read that you won the 2002 Chrysler $1 Million Film Festival and used that grant money to make your first feature film. Oh, is that the award in there? Our listeners can't see, but it looks like a film reel, and it's like a gold film reel. Is that it?
Chauncey looks up to be above it.
We also see Chauncey in here.
Yeah,
so
that's the hero bear.
Oh my God, I love that. So we know that you used that to make your first feature film, the 2005 slasher flick Cry Wolf. But first, can you tell us just about the short film that won that competition?
It was more than one short film. So Project Greenlight had been a big hit for HBO and Miramax, and so Universal sponsored this thing called the Chrysler $1 Million Film Festival. They sold the naming rights to Chrysler. Doug Liman's production company, Hypnotic, ran it. Fortunately, they weren't able to sell the reality TV show rights, so there's no TV show about it, but it was this kind of PR event that lasted 7 months where they would have parties and different phases. They put my short film, The Tower of Babel, up on the internet, and people had to vote. I think like 30 films were being voted on. I made the cut to the top 10. The top 10 of us were flown to Cannes during the Cannes Film Festival. We had to make a new short film with a Chrysler Crossfire, but we weren't allowed to drive it, which was challenging. And then the top 5 of us had to move into a mansion in Westwood and write a screenplay in like a month while they were throwing all these parties. Like Jewel was yodeling in the backyard while I was trying to write my screenplay. We had to design a poster and then present it at the Toronto Film Festival. And I won the whole thing. I had a ringer, though, with me, a guy named Bo Bauman, who was my writing partner at the time, was my producing partner, still a very successful, talented guy as a producer. He's doing Back in Action for Netflix right now. I just did Jerry Seinfeld's directorial debut, one of my best friends. That's actually who I'm having dinner with after this podcast.
And he worked on Cry Wolf with you, right? Didn't he co-write it?
We co-wrote it. He produced it. I directed it. Our dream was to kind of be like Ron Howard and Brian Grazer, but we just weren't successful enough to start our own company quickly enough. So we had to ultimately kind of go our separate ways to keep working. I would love to, obviously keep working with him at some point in the future. And we made Cry Wolf, which, it's a slasher movie, but it's also not a slasher movie, right? So it kind of speaks to what I was talking to earlier about subgenres within the genre of horror. And I was really obsessed with this idea of playing with subjectivity, like this sort of theory that you have a character talking about buying a car, and he would say, I bought a blue car, and you cut to a shot of him driving off the lot in a blue car. And then he would say, I lied, I actually bought a red car, and you cut to a shot of him driving off the lot on a red car. Well, why was the blue car a lie and the red car the truth? I showed you both. Right.
Yeah, the movie kept me guessing because we obviously refreshed watching it after a while, and I was like, oh yeah, it's like I was really into it.
I was almost waiting for you to see if April Fool's Day was like a movie that had stuck with you, just because the whole idea of what's real, what isn't real, and if it's a movie where you think something's going on but it may not be going on, but still in your head, and as a viewer, like I still look at April Fool's Day as a slasher film, even though it really isn't, and.
It's been a long time since I've seen April Fool's Day, and I know Cry Wolf got compared to it quite a bit when the movie came out. If I remember correctly, April Fool's Day ends with "It was all a joke," right?
Yes. Yeah.
So it was really important for me with our movie to not do that, because I felt then there were no stakes. It's kind of when we're developing scripts and ideas, me and my friends, we always talk about not wanting to end with a kick in the nuts, which is like saying to the audience, like,
oh, sorry, it was all a dream.
Yeah.
It was all a dream.
The movie ends, it's all a dream.
Yeah.
The moment before death, it didn't really happen. And so I sort of feel, no slight towards April Fool's Day. I sort of felt the version where it was like all a joke was kind of a kick in the nuts. So spoiler alert, obviously it ends up being a whole setup that all these people that we showed you dying actually didn't die. but it was all for a reason, to basically facilitate someone's murder, so that there were real stakes, there were real consequences when it was over.
Yeah, totally. You know, in one of the DVD special features for Cry Wolf, we heard you say a pretty powerful statement. You said, "We are going to spend the rest of our careers trying to replicate this experience." And I was just wondering, so what made working on Cry Wolf so impactful? And do you still find yourself trying to replicate that experience?
I forgot I said that. It's a funny thing. This is a tangent. I'll come back to that in a second. But most filmmakers, I think this is true for them. It's certainly true for me. I hate watching my movies. Like, once I'm done with it, I am done. I don't want to look at it. I don't want to think about it. There's a George Lucas quote that filmmakers don't finish films, they abandon them. And so that's sort of what happens. But now that I've been doing this for 20 years and I've got a little bit of a body of work, I've sort of started to realize that it's kind of interesting to go back and look at the really early stuff, because I have enough distance now that I don't hate it. I don't feel like I made all these mistakes. It's almost more like I get to have a conversation with my younger self, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so I haven't really listened to old DVD commentaries, but it would probably be an even more visceral version of that. So I think the reason why I probably said that was not just because we had a good time. We did have a good time, but it was a really kind of pure filmmaking experience, because we only had $1 million. We had no supervision. Everyone had to be there because they wanted to be there. Nobody was collecting a paycheck. And we all just kind of like pulled together and worked really, really hard to get this thing done. I mean, I was like 26, 27 years old directing a feature film for a studio. I mean, that's crazy. It's crazy. Like,
most importantly,
falling flat on our faces.
Most importantly, what was it like directing John Bon Jovi?
I kept trying to creep lines from Bon Jovi songs, lyrics into my direction. Like, so John, in this scene, you're shot through the heart.
We're just living on a prayer, everyone.
Yes,
we're living on a prayer.
Yes, her love is like bad medicine for your character.
It's my life, all right?
Let's keep.
I'm a big John Bon Jovi fan,
soap
but
opera aspect was great.
He's a great actor. I just didn't know what he would be like to direct.
He's a great actor. He's a great guy. He has an incredible sense of humility. I mean, he basically donated his time being there. I think the salary we paid him like covered his security guard. It was like a joke, but he did it for the love of filmmaking. And I really got along with him. And honestly, to this day, 20 some odd years later, we have the same birthday. And I always email him on our birthday, and he emails me back within like 15 minutes.
And you're like, you are wanted, dead or alive. Sorry. Okay, last one. But okay, so over the next decade or so, you ended up directing more action films like Never Back Down, Kick-Ass 2, True Memoirs of an International Assassin. But then in 2018, you returned to horror as the director and co-writer of Truth or Dare. So how did you get involved with that project and back into the horror genre? So,
I mean, one of the things you do as a director kind of out there hustling is you take general meetings. And I'm a big believer in that. Like, when I have any downtime in my career, if I'm in between projects, I just call up my reps. I'm like, general meeting, start setting them up. I don't care who, get me in those doors. It's just like ideas get generated that way. You find new collaborators. It's just a way to get things going. And I can't remember if I asked for it or if he asked for it, but I had a meeting with Jason Blum, a general meeting, and we just were talking. And he said, Universal wants to make a supernatural horror film called Truth or Dare. And I was like, okay, you have a script, you have a treatment, what do you have? He's like, nothing. We just got the title. And I pitched out the opening scene of that movie in the meeting, the whole gas station scene where she sets the person on fire.
Yeah.
And he was like, that's amazing. What happens next? And I was like, I don't know. I'm making it up right here on the spot. This is improvised pitching. And they said, well, let's do it. And so I brought in Chris Roach and Jillian Jacobs, Chris is one of my best friends. And obviously I love Jill. Jill is his wife. And they had been writing together, and I'd worked on some other things with Chris. Like he wrote this movie that I produced called Nonstop with Liam Neeson, and the three of us just decided to work together and almost treat it like a little mini writer's room. And we wrote the story together, and then we split up the acts and passed them around. And I just loved the experience, and we delivered a script that they were excited to make.
That's so cool. I mean, like, and I'm just thinking about like during the writers' meetings, if you guys were playing Truth or Dare, if that went down. But like, I obviously we want to get to Imaginary, so I'll just give you one more question leading up to that. In 2022, we mentioned the Netflix horror comedy, The Curse of Bridge Hollow, and I mentioned I love this film so much because it's so Halloween focused, with tons of animatronics and lights and decorations. Can you tell us just a little bit about working on this movie? Like, did it feel like it was Halloween every day of production?
Yes and no. We were actually shooting during Halloween, and people were like, "Are you going to dress up?" I was like, "We do Halloween every day. There's no difference between tomorrow and the next day. It's all Halloween here." I loved it because it was my chance to sort of make a Amblin-y kind of Jumanji Ghostbusters sort of movie. And I didn't write it, but I thought it was a wonderful opportunity to do some world creation. It was the biggest budget I've ever worked with. It was $60 million for Netflix. So that was quite a bit more than I'd ever had on a Blumhouse movie. And, I just interviewed every creature shop in town. I ended up hiring 4 different creature shops to make all those monsters because one house just couldn't get it done. And one of the houses was Spectral Motion, Mike Elizade's company. And that's the company I hired to do all of the monsters in Imaginary.
Oh, wow. Yeah. So moving on to Imaginary, which just hit theaters on March 8th. Now, we want to warn listeners that we are going to ask Jeff about some specific plot points. So, if you don't want anything from the movie spoiled, you should probably go see the movie first before continuing with this interview. But so we read that obviously you'd already worked with Blumhouse before. We read that you approached Blumhouse with the idea for this film. So was there anything specific that inspired the story? Like, did you have an imaginary friend as a kid?
The movie was really inspired by 3 things. Jason Blum signed me to a first look deal, and he said, for your next movie, I want a classic Blumhouse movie, like something from earlier in the company's catalog. They'd gotten really into these real world based horror films like The Purge and Halloween that were very dark. And he was like, I want supernatural horror. Family moves into a house, bump in the night, want some humor. I want it to be fun. I thought, okay, challenge accepted.
It's something a family could go to. Like, I would love if my family took me when I was younger.
Yeah, it's Poltergeist. People throw around the expression gateway horror. I don't really like that because that makes it sound soft. I don't think the movie's soft. I would describe it as like 4-quadrant horror. Like, even if you're a little squeamish, you're going to like it. It's a ghost story. It's the kind of thing you would tell around a campfire. It's not just about sort of the brutality of the kills.
Yeah, no, and there's very different types of horror, but it is one random thing that we did, while doing research on you, that we noticed is that all of the films you've directed, including this one, happen to be PG-13. Do you find yourself being drawn to the type of horror that appeals to that audience, or is that just like a coincidence?
It's a little bit of both. I think because I enjoy sort of the gamification of horror, the jump scares, the sequences, the playing with the audience, the setting things up, paying it off visually, doing like distractions and things like that. I think I gravitate more towards horror movies that have that baked into the narrative, as opposed to, again, just like the guy running at the girl with the chainsaw, right? Like it's not really my thing. I mean, I don't have a problem with those movies. I like watching them. It's just not, I don't know if it's the kind of movie I would make necessarily. And so what people don't realize is that the rating is often driven by the story. So if you're making a movie about an imaginary friend, you'd be hard pressed to make that R, because it's about things that are implied off camera, things that are being imagined. Whereas when you make a slasher, it's about a guy with a knife sticking it in people, like very violent imagery. Like it's hard to get around the R rating on that. So with Cry Wolf, I mean, I think I went to the MPA like 13, 14 times before I finally got the rating. And I had to like provide these rationales. Well, they're just imagining the kill. It's not really happening. And you make the blood a little bit blacker and you change the sound of that. And that was the main reason we had to do that, was just they thought there would be a bigger opening weekend if it was PG-13. And also that was a time when you could open a movie as PG-13, but then you could put out the DVD, as R or as unrated. And the studios believed that was another way to access a new revenue stream.
And we read that this is your 3rd collaboration with Blumhouse. What's it like working on a Blumhouse film?
Oh, it's the best. It's the best. I love Jason. I mean, he is like a producer in the real sense of the word. Like he's not trying to like direct, the movie from the chair behind the monitor. Like he finds a piece of material, he gets the team together, right? And he gives them the resources they need to execute. And then he lets them go execute. Then he looks at the final product, he offers ideas to elevate it. Additional photography is usually done. Then he takes the movie into the studio and he, forces them to release it in the best possible way with the best marketing, and just beats them up and works them like a politician. And he gets it out there. So he starts it and he finishes it and he protects his talent. And that's what a producer is supposed to do.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And it's also, Blumhouse has become such a major player in horror that it's almost like you put that on a movie and it comes with equity, when you put that on a movie. And now you've had three Blumhouse films.
Yeah, by the way, I just put it on it. My first two movies were called Blumhouse's Truth or Dare and Blumhouse's Fantasy Island. I started to joke with Jason. I was like, if I ever have a kid, is he going to be called Blumhouse's Wadlow? I'm actually quite surprised this movie isn't called Blumhouse's Imaginary. Yeah, because listen, they do it so well. That's hard-earned equity, and so I don't begrudge Jason or Blumhouse, that kind of above the title placement for them, because I'm thrilled to reside in the House of Blum.
We will gladly be called Blumhouse's Happy Horror Time if Jason Blum would like to produce our podcast. So in the movie, you did such a good job at connecting the storyline for Jessica, the main protagonist, with the experiences that her youngest stepdaughter Alice is going through. And I can't imagine that was easy, since adults and children have pretty different imaginations. So what I was to ask you was, how did you go about balancing like the more childlike imaginary elements with situations that also would scare adults?
Well, kids' fairy tales used to be pretty intense and pretty scary. It wasn't until really like they got Disneyfied. Not that I have a problem with Disney. I would love to go work for Disney, but not until they were the teeth were taken out of them did they become sort of synonymous with this kind of sanitized version of childhood. So you kind of just lean into what's there. I mean, kids stories are often intense and scary. I mean, you look at the works of Roald Dahl or Lewis Carroll, or honestly even Maurice Sendak, right? There's some scary stuff in those stories. And so we just tried to look at those, reference those things, and then imagine if they were suddenly real and right in front of you. I mean, that would be pretty intense.
Yeah, it is funny that you mentioned fairy tales, because like when I was growing up, I only knew Disney, and then I did hear about like what fairy tales used to be, and I was like, oh my God, those aren't kids' stories, or they are, but they're terrifying.
I remember Disney being scary to me. I don't know.
you're like, what? Dumbo was terrifying.
No, it was. Remember when the mom was so mad?
Well,
yeah.
I remember when Bambi's mom died, and that made me cry. But that,
right?
Yeah. So the movie has a really solid cast with strong performances from DeWanda Wise, who plays Jessica, Tegan Burns, who plays her teenage stepdaughter Taylor, and Piper Braun, who plays Alice. But one name that horror fans will be ecstatic to see in this film is Betty Buckley, aka Miss Collins from the original Carrie. She plays Gloria, the neighbor who used to babysit Jessica as a child. So I gotta ask, how did Betty get involved with this project? And spoiler alert, everyone, how did she feel about her character's fate?
So Betty was actually the first actor cast in the movie. She sent Blum an email and said, hey, Jason, do you have any scary movies for me to be in? And he forwarded me the email and said, can Betty play Gloria in Imaginary? I said, can she? Will she? I mean, that would be a dream come true. And so she actually was cast before anyone else. How did she feel about her death? I mean, she likes it when her characters die. She does this whole bit about how, like, I think every horror movie she's ever been in, her characters all die in some gruesome fashion. So I think she likes the idea of it. I don't know how much she liked the notion that we were going to have to film it, because it's not easy to do these things. And she is a icon of stage and screen, and has been doing this for a very long time. Ultimately, she was game and ready to do anything. Was such a team player and a pleasure to work with. So I think it all came out beautifully in the end.
I love that she wrote Jason Blum and said, "Have any scary movies for me?" I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah.
That worked out. I'm gonna do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, what went into creating the Never Ever imaginary world, and where were those scenes filmed?
So the Never Ever changed a lot. I mean, I always knew it was going to be like a long, dark hallway with lots of doors. I found that to be sort of metaphorically on point for what your imagination would be. It's never ending because that's what your imagination is. But also there's all these like options, choices you can make. And just having a lot of doors is scary because you never know what's going to come out of what door. I started working with our production designer, Megan Rogers, who's crazy talented, and this concept artist who I use on all my movies named Greg Semkow. And he did some initial renderings. We started talking a lot about MC Escher, and again, Lewis Carroll too, and this sort of like Alice in Wonderland kind of vibe. I mean, it's not a coincidence that Piper Braun plays a character named Alice. And Megan really ran with it, and she showed me these designs, and I was like, I don't think we have the money to do this, Megan. And our line producers, Paul Udo and Paige Pemberton, are just geniuses, and they figured out how to move some money around and work with Megan, and they kind of got us there. And the set is ultimately a hybrid set. It's a set we built. Like, we built the twisty hallway, we built what I call the flat iron section where the doors form a triangle. We did a couple intersections, but then it's just set extensions beyond that. You hang green screens, you make the hallways look like they're on forever. It was Megan's idea to put the clouds in the ceiling, and that worked out better than I could have possibly imagined, because the lightning in the clouds was practical on the set, but then in a shot where you see like the lightning tracing, and then you see the set extension, the visual effects artists at Crafty Apes, they kept the lightning going down the clouds, down the never-ending hallway. So it became very difficult to tell where the set ended and the CG began, because we had these elements that would seamlessly move across the border.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I totally did get an Alice in Wonderland vibe from it, like in the scariest way, though. But then again, Alice in Wonderland is kind of scary as it is. It's one of those things that is trippy and scary. But, not only does your film feature Chauncey, the teddy bear, but there's also the full-sized beastly version of Chauncey, the spider creature, and this shadowy entity. So how did you come up with and go about executing the look for those creatures, and which did you personally find to be the scariest?
Well, look, it's collaborative art. So you write an idea on the page, then, what I usually would do is then bring in Greg Semkow, who I talked about, and show him the script, but also kind of give him a brief and talk about some references. And he would do a couple iterations, and I would give him freedom to play with things and try different things. Then you bring on a creature house like Spectral Motion. They have a whole team of artists. They look at Greg's stuff. They look at the script. They have their own ideas. They start showing me designs. There's a lot of back and forth, a lot of iterations. And then you start talking about how we're going to build this. Do we have the resources to do it the way we want to do it? I'm a big believer in what I call the practical CG hybrid approach, which is I say I like practical and I want everything to be practical, but I always intend some CG sweetener, right? So that you can't really tell what's real and what's not. So, for example, with the Bear Beast, that's a guy in a suit with animatronics controlling his face. So his eyes are moving and his lips are moving. There's like 4 puppeteers off the set with like radio control car controllers,
wow,
doing all that with servos.
For some reason, I didn't know if that was like that's a full-on suit with puppet. That is terrifying.
Dane DeLegra, who played the Predator in Prey, is in that suit. He's like 7 feet tall. But then, if you see his mouth, his tongue, and the drool, that's all CG, right? So you kind of pick your moment to use the CG. It's cheaper, and if you can blend the worlds, then the audience, I think they're not sure what's real and what's not, and that's ultimately the goal.
Wow. So then which one did you find the scariest between the Bear Beast, the spider, and the shadowy entity? Because I can tell you which one I found, but I'm going to wait for you.
I mean, they're all pretty scary. I thought that spider creature design was really impressive. It was just, I talked a lot about, I'm blanking on the character's name. There's a bounty hunter who is in The Mandalorian. He's got like a Cade. Anyway,
Star Wars.
He was in The Mandalorian, and the makeup was, he had these like sort of big CG eyes, but the makeup, then the makeup application stopped here, and it was the guy's real mouth and teeth. and you couldn't really see where the transition happened. But by having a real mouth and real teeth in the creature's face, it just gave it such a reality. And so that's what we did with the spider. Like that's the super former's like real mouth, and we gave him some monstrous like teeth to put in there. But then it kind of turns into a spider face as it goes up his face, and I just found that really effective.
Anything with spiders.
Well, see, me for some reason, so the shadowy entity, I know that's just kind of, I don't know, something about, for me, like seeing something in the background that's just kind of a shadow in the form of a person has always terrified me. So I thought that one scared me the most. I mean, the beast was terrified, but that one, any sort of shadowy thing just waiting behind you always scares me. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah,
I agree. Like when she walked downstairs and like you could see the shadow.
Yeah, like those kind of things where, again, and I think obviously you noticed because you did a movie called Imaginary, but what you can imagine can sometimes be scarier than what you can see. And so it's almost like I think all sorts of things when I just see a shadowy type of thing. But anyway, moving on. Spoiler alert again. Before the film truly ends, there's this false misdirect ending where you think Jessica is out of the never ever and back with her family, only to find out that nope, she's still stuck in the nightmare world. And I found that part to be really creepy. I just was wondering, was there ever a point like in where the film was going to end there versus adding on the happier ending? Like you always hear about studios coming in and wanting to change the ending. Was there ever a point where you're going to end it in that really creepy, not so happy moment?
No. In fact, I would say that idea was probably the first idea I had for this movie. Like when I decided I wanted to do an imaginary friend movie long before Chauncey was involved, or honestly, even before I started talking to Greg and Jason, I knew that there was going to be that fake ending, that it just was so baked into the DNA of making a movie about an imaginary world that we had to play with delusion a little bit and like manifesting, this sort of this fairy tale that just wasn't real, that we could all relate to. That there was nothing fantastical about it. It was actually quite practical in the application of the imaginary world. I will say the other big twist in the movie, another spoiler alert coming, that the bear is not there. That's what we call that twist. That was a very late in the game addition. Like we were getting ready to make the movie and it's called Imaginary, but the imaginary friend was a stuffed bear. And the head of the studio, Adam Fogelson, he actually gave the note. He's like, that doesn't really make sense, does it? Like it's in a movie about an imaginary friend, but it's not imaginary. The stuffed bear is real. I was like, yeah, it doesn't matter. Let's make the movie. She's imagining that it's got a personality. It's imaginary. But then, Cooper Samuelson, who kind of runs Blumhouse for Jason, the creative side, he's like, we got to address that now. We got to do something about that. I was like, ugh. We kind of went back and forth, and I worked with Greg and Jason and Cooper and our other executive, Ryan. And honestly, I can't remember whose pitch it was. It might have been Cooper's, but this idea that the stuffed bear was also imaginary, that it wasn't actually there. And it just clicked for me. I was like, oh, we can do this Sixth Sense kind of scene where we realize it's a shared delusion between Alice and Jessica. And also that I don't think anyone would expect an inanimate object to be, the imaginary thing. You always think the imaginary thing is going to be like a creature or a monster or a person. Like to say like, no, the imaginary thing is this coffee mug, right? It's kind of an out there idea.
Yeah, I mean, I remember we were shocked.
I looked at him and I was like, "Oh, I love that." I was like, "Oh, that's so cool."
Yeah, it's like it was a twist that didn't see. I mean, there's obviously so much marketing is based on the bear, and to think that the bear may have been in their imagination too. It was like it was a layer on top of the layer of the imagination. Yeah. So yeah, we love the fake outs.
Was there any kind of huge plot or anything changed from script to screen?
Yeah, I mean, a huge change happened like just a couple weeks before we started shooting, and that was the introduction of the entity character. So that thing was not in the movie. And James Wan read the script, and he gave this note. He said, "Well, what if there's this what if the bad thing isn't actually the stuffed bear, but there's like something lurking in the corner that's like projecting the bear or puppeteering the bear?" I was like, ooh, that's good. And it would infuse a lot of creepy imagery, to your point, Matt, that we could use earlier in the film. And so I got really excited about the idea. And I actually wrote the entity into many more scenes than he is in the movie. And then when we were cutting the film, we could sort of pick and choose where we wanted him to show up.
I love that. So that means James Wan and I think alike. That's really cool. So that changed. Were there any deleted scenes, like any that'll be on the Blu-ray or anything?
Unrated cut?
Yeah, an unrated cut, or is there like?
No, we got a PG-13 on our first pass because of just the story driving the rating. As far as deleted scenes, with these Blumhouse movies, you don't really have the resources to shoot a lot of things that aren't in the movie. The only reason I could have the option to use the entity in scenes he wasn't necessarily in the final cut was if he was there already for another scene and I had a setup, I would do one shot and I would say, okay, get Michael in here. And then I would like put Michael in the corner and then just do a version of that shot. It didn't really cost me any time or money to do that. I think there's one scene maybe where like Alice is painting Jessica in a yellow dress and Chauncey has some like paint on his face. It's kind of a reveal that he might be more than just a stuffed bear. That happens pretty early on. But, we wanted to get the movie going. We wanted to get to the bear not being there faster. So I think we just cut that scene out. I think it was the kind of scene that you would have seen in the movie if we never went to the imaginary world. If it was a little bit more of a slow burn, haunted toy movie. But because we wanted to kind of get to that big, crazy third act, we had to pick up some speed.
You know what's funny about deleted scenes? Like big fans like us, crave, getting the Blu-ray to get the deleted scenes. But the truth is, once you watch them, if they're good scenes, then I get sad that they weren't in the movie. So in a way,
or sometimes I'm like, gosh, that scene drags.
Yeah. So in a way, it's kind of good that there isn't deleted scenes because that means everything was good enough to put into the movie, or and that kind of thing.
Or I just didn't have the money to shoot things that I wasn't 100% sure was going to be in the movie.
That.
Yeah. I mean, I find deleted scenes are usually one of two things happens. They're either like deleted for a reason. You watch them, you're like, oh yeah, these are not good. Or the studio really had an incredible amount of control over the cut. And you're like, oh, I can see why the director was into that scene. It's too bad it didn't end up in the movie. Certainly for me, I have fortunately yet to be in a situation where I had someone come in and like recut my movie. So with my movies, even when I include deleted scenes, they're kind of not in the movie for a reason.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So do you feel like, and I know, this may depend on a lot of factors, but just from this standpoint, do you feel like there's more story to be told in the world of Imaginary? Meaning, would you be up for working on a sequel?
The movie's called Imaginary. If we can't come up with 1,000 ideas, there's something like we're totally creatively bankrupt. It should not be working.
We can get one film. That's it.
Yes, I can't think of anything else. Yeah, so, the better question is, would you be up for working on a sequel?
Oh, of course. I mean, if people want it, I'm a big believer in this idea that I don't make movies, I make audience experiences, right? So I'm acknowledging that the audience is an active participant in the process. So my final product isn't a movie. My final product is the meaning an audience makes when they perceive the movie through the filter of their own life, right?
Was it ever going to be called Chauncey? I'm just kidding. Oh, no. Okay. No. I love the name Chauncey.
Well, that's one of the points I usually make about the movies. I say, listen, it's not called Chauncey. It's called Imaginary. It's about something much bigger than just a haunted bear. Yeah. And so to my point about the audience's experience, if the audience has an experience that justifies the sequel, absolutely, I would kill to make a sequel. If the movie doesn't land with an audience and there isn't really a demand for a sequel, I do not want to make a sequel.
You'll imagine something different. Yeah. Well, so just a couple final questions before we wrap up, Jeff. So since you just made a horror film that makes something childlike and innocent scary, aka a teddy bear, I was wondering your thoughts on the whole trend right now of taking old children's properties like Winnie the Pooh and Steamboat Willie and turning them into horror films. Do you have any thoughts on that? And have you seen or heard about any of these films?
Yeah, of course. Blood and Honey, I think it's the Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, and there's a sequel now coming in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fun. What's really going on there is the underlying rights for those characters are falling into the public domain. So it's kind of like independent filmmakers thumbing their nose at Disney because Disney can't stop them. And I think horror is just the cheapest genre. So they can do it for as little money as possible and try to make as much money as possible. I mean, I think it's fun. I don't think it's something I would necessarily want to do, but my hat's off to those filmmakers because it's really inventive.
You mean you're not signing on to Bambi's Revenge? Yeah, it's just crazy because it's become such a thing now. And yeah, I figured because of the properties. Another thing I wanted to ask you about, because I know this is something that's important to you. Back in 2004, you founded the Adrenaline Film Project, a competition for amateur filmmakers at the Virginia Film Festival. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what inspired you to create that project?
Yeah, it's been 20 years, which is shocking. So I was 27 years old. I just shot Cry Wolf. It hadn't even come out yet. And I was on the board of the Virginia Film Festival. I am on the board of the Virginia Film Festival. And the director at the time asked me if I had any ideas for, honestly, something like the Roger Ebert shot-by-shot workshop, right? Some sort of educational program that could be put on during the film festival. And I had just won the Chrysler contest, and I had to make a film in 72 hours. I'm sorry, in 5 days in France for that. And I thought, well, what if we do an even more compressed version, similar to the 48-hour film project, which already existed, but the difference being it would be a sort of a version of the Hollywood filmmaking process where we would bring in Hollywood mentors who would work with the teams, and at each round in the 72 hours, pitching, writing, shooting, editing, they have to get a green light from the mentors. So we're basically forcing them to collaborate with the mentors. I thought it would be a great primer for what it's like to actually work in the film business, because I think a lot of arts education programs do their students a disservice because they're like, yeah, follow your muse, who cares? That ain't how you have a career in the arts. You want a career in the arts, specifically in film and television, you better work hard, you better deliver, and you better be willing to collaborate and compromise, or it's not going to happen for you.
Yeah. And so is it an annual thing that you do, or is it like every few? Oh, wow. And
every fall.
And you participate in it with every
so I'm one of the mentors. I'm slowly becoming sort of a mentor emeritus because sometimes I'm busy and I can't be there. So I help kind of get it set up, and then I'm not really there for the execution. But what's incredible is the mentors who are really the point people right now are former participants. They did it, 20, 19, 18 years ago. Steve Robillard, one of the mentors, won an Emmy. Han West, he's produced movies that have been in theaters and on Netflix. He's super successful. He participated in Adrenaline years ago. So it's really rewarding for me to see them kind of come into their own. And I'm so grateful that they want to come back and contribute to the program.
That's really cool.
And do you have any upcoming projects that you can talk about?
I think this kind of got leaked today. So I guess I'm comfortable talking about it now. I just wrote a spec based on this book, Van Halen Rising, which is about the band Van Halen in high school, and how the Van Halen brothers and David Lee Roth didn't really get along. And only when they got over their differences and buried the hatchet were they able to come together and get their first big record deal. And that's where the movie ends. So it's like a sort of Dazed and Confused meets Almost Famous about these kids in high school sort of solving their problems through music.
Oh, wow. And so this is something you said you wrote the script for. So it's very much like pre-production kind of thing, but it's
no, we got to find a financier. So I got the rights to the book. I spec the script. I've got some great producers I'm working with, and then it will go out, sometime in the near future, and hopefully a financier will jump on board.
Oh, that's great. And then the most important question of this entire interview: do you remember meeting Tim at the Honolulu Marathon in 2005?
I believe he was the one racing ahead of me towards the finish line, uncatchable
Tim,
because
give the listeners
speed.
I am the laziest runner. I've run 4 marathons. I will brag about that. But you were it was 6 o'clock in the morning when we got. Do you remember that? It was early hours, but you were in the fast running group. I was in the slow running group. But I remember I went up to you and you gave me a Cry Wolf flashlight. So thank you very much.
Just so you know, listeners, I just need to tell listeners, before we got this interview with Jeff, Tim told me about how he knew him from this marathon. And he did say, Jeff was so nice. He talked to me about Cry Wolf and gave me this memorabilia. So and this is at a marathon. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, I must have had like some leftover swag or something.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't
you
remember.
did. It was so
I don't like
fun.
carry branded things
Well,
around
you
just
should have.
randomly.
No, well that's awesome, and also it speaks to your character. So it was just a cool random connection because Tim
I
definitely
mean, to be
remembered.
honest, I just really wanted to go to Hawaii.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
That was
It was a great experience. It was for a great cause. We raised
Yeah, it
money for
was.
the
We
AIDS
raised a
Project
lot of
Los
money.
Angeles.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jeff, we have one final question for you. And first off, thank you so much for taking the time to talk about everything with the film, talk about your past movies. Like I said, we're big fans. We hope that you return to horror also after this Van Halen project, because that's our thing, and we'd love to see.
I got something cooking with Jason Blum. Don't you worry.
Oh, good.
Julian Morris, whatever.
Julian Morris. Yeah. By the way, did you ever see his next horror film, Donkey Punch?
No, but I remember the title very well.
Yes, I mean, just trust me on it. Watch it. It was just funny that he went from your film to Donkey Punch. It's a horror movie based on a weird sex position. So yeah, it's an interesting leap.
No more.
Yes, exactly. So our final question for you, I know it's going to put you on the spot a little bit, but we ask this to everyone we interview. What is one thing that you can tell us about your experience working on Imaginary that you have never told any other interviewer, publication, or podcaster to date? And I know you've been doing a ton of press for this movie, so you've been talking a lot about it, but just one thing, doesn't have to be like juicy gossip unless you want it to be, or just anything that you have not told any other interviewer about your experience working on Imaginary.
Chauncey talks.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of juicy stuff in that, but I'm racking my brain to see what I haven't brought up anywhere. I would say a little juicy, fun fact about Imaginary is, I might get in trouble for this one.
Tell us. Go on. Yeah.
I mean, it shouldn't really be a surprise to anyone who understands how Blumhouse works, but Universal passed on the movie. They didn't want to make it. That's why we're at Lionsgate. And the feedback was teddy bears aren't scary.
Oh, really? I think mine is terrifying every night when I go to bed. I'm serious.
Really? Yeah. That was the only note you got? Teddy bears aren't scary?
Yeah. They were like, we don't want to make it. Teddy bears aren't scary. And one of the reasons why I love working with Jason Blum is he said, okay, great. And he called up Lionsgate and he said, do you want my next movie? And they said, absolutely.
Wow. Look at that. Jason Blum has some power.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, I would do anything for the guy. I mean, he is truly changing how movies are made. And 100 years from now, film students are going to study his career the same way I studied Wahlberg and Selznick's career when I was studying film.
He, you know what, we've heard from people who've worked with him good things about him. And I actually went to the Halloween 40th anniversary convention in 2018, which he was at because they were releasing the new Halloween movie. And I saw him and I said hi and he like stopped and was like, are you excited about the movie? Like, again, I'm nobody. And he was being just really nice to talk about, and just knowing that, like you said, because it's not just about like the numbers, it's about the fan experience and the audience reaction. And there's so much, especially that goes into a lot of like these horror properties that it's all about the fans. That's what keeps them alive. So, maybe that there's going to be a fan group to keep Chauncey in the Imaginary world alive.
I love the name Chauncey.
It worked. Actually, here's even a better factoid than that. I did not like the name at first, and I didn't even remember this. But Greg and Jason reminded me recently that they wrote the name into the script, and I was like, it kind of sounds like a weird butler or something. I'm not sure. And we talked about different ideas for the name, and nothing really stuck, and it just kind of stayed there. And finally, I just got to the point where I was like, yeah, it's perfect. I love it. Let's just do it.
I could say it all day.
You've said it 3 times in this interview.
I think my initial aversion to it was I really did not want to make a Chucky movie. And I felt that it just sounded a little too like Chucky, Chauncey. It just it felt too much like Chucky, and it was kind of reminding me of Chucky. But we got so far away from making a Chucky movie, it just didn't really matter anymore.
Yeah, no, definitely. Well, again, thank you so much for your time today, and just for chatting with us, because I know you've been doing a ton of press, so I'm sure you like another interview, but hopefully we provided some fun for you, and we wish you, congrats on the movie, wish you nothing but the best, and can't wait to see what you do next.
I appreciate that, guys. Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay, definitely. Take care. Okay, bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of Happy Horror Time.
This podcast is hosted by Tim Murdoch and myself, Matt Emmert. It's produced by Jacob Randall.
You can listen to the podcast directly on our website, happyhorrortime.com, or Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, or wherever you stream podcasts.
We release new episodes every Monday. The first Monday of the month is always an interview with a horror star, and every other week we review a new horror film. Now, our reviews do contain spoilers, but you can check out our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter/X social pages the Friday before release day to find out the movie we'll be discussing.
If you'd like to contact us, you can send an email to happyhorrortime@gmail.com.
And if you'd like to support the podcast, please sign up to be a patron at www.patreon.com/happyhorrortime. Patrons get access to our monthly bonus episodes, all our regular episodes ad-free and a day early, our monthly newsletter, the ability to vote in our polls, and, Tim, are you ready for this?
Autographed Happy Horror Time stickers. I'm Tim Murdoch.
And I'm Matt Emmert, and we hope you have a happy horror time.